All right. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar, So You Want to Be a GC. I'm Shep Davidson. I'm a partner in the Business Litigation Department at Burns & Levinson. I'm also a member of the Executive Committee. Really happy to host everybody today. I wanted to tell you I'm wearing the hat, had a little scalp procedure, and as people who are on the call know me, it was not to remove any of my ego. It's still completely intact. But I did wear a suit, and this is not like the normal sort of Zoom suit either. I just want you to know I'm wearing pants and actually even have the wingtips. Okay, so that's how seriously I'm taking the program today. So a couple little housekeeping matters first. The webinar is being recorded, so it'll be available if any of you have to leave afterwards. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature, which I have. It's either at the bottom or the top of your screen, and type those in there. We will take questions. We're going to try to do them at the end of the program, but please type them out. If we can't get to your questions, we'll try to follow up and send you an answer afterwards. We will have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, trying to be respectful of everybody's time. With that, let me introduce our panelists in random order. Deanna Sheridan, who's the General Counsel and Vice President Secretary at Spartan Race, Inc. For those of you who may not know Spartan Race, it's a global endurance sports and fitness brand defined by goal setting, resilience, and community. In her role at Spartan Race, Deanna provides strategic and legal compliance review and advice to the executive team, board of directors, and employees, and supervises a legal team that's responsible for implementing and enforcing compliance policies and procedure, drafting and reviewing an average of 100 contracts per month, managing and enforcing Spartan's large global intellectual property portfolio, and managing litigation. In her spare time, to the extent she has any, Deanna is a gear crew volunteer, band coach, and vocal instructor with Girls Rock Campaign Boston, a nonprofit that builds greater self-expression, self-confidence, and community through music. Next, to my left, I think the way our little Brady Bunch squares work here is Melanie Goins. Melanie's the General Counsel, Corporate Secretary at care.com, which offers an array of services that enables families to find, manage, and pay for care, and provides employment opportunities for caregivers. In her role as GC, Melanie provides strategic advice to the executive team and manages an in-house group that supports the company's products and technology and advises on corporate, transactional, and litigation managers. Melanie was Associate GC at care.com from 2012 to 2018, left to become General Counsel for Kaplan Technologies, and then returned to care.com as General Counsel in 2019. When she's not working at care.com, Melanie is chair of the board of Breakthrough Greater Boston, a college access and success program supporting students in Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. Also, Melanie's guilty pleasures during COVID have been doing the New York Times crossword puzzle and eating her husband's COVID hobby, which is making delicious desserts. So, and then last but certainly not least is Ben Kaplan. Ben's been General Counsel of Velcro since 2019. Velcro makes hook and loop fasteners. Do not call the product Velcro. That will undermine the trademark. And if you don't believe me, please, and actually even if you do believe me, Google Velcro video music. It's fantastic. It's a whole video music montage about their trademarks and their hook and loop fasteners. I actually watched it again this morning, Ben, and I realized there's actually 2 subsequent videos that were made as well. They're hilarious and they're really fun. Prior to joining Velcro, Ben worked for a number of other companies as in-house counsel, including Pegasystems and Netcracker Technology. Ben started his legal career at Wilmer Hale, and this is how old he is. It was actually called Hale and Dorr when Ben was at Wilmer Hale. Ben's also an avid biker. He has ridden in the Pan Mass Challenge, which is quite a grueling race for the past 7 years. So that's our panel, quite impressive. Really glad they can join us. So let's just jump in. Our first topic is being a legal counsel and business advisor. A gentleman named Noel Elfin is an attorney in Illinois. He was in-house for 27 years. The last 15 is General Counsel. In 2019, Noel wrote an advice piece in Corporate Counsel magazine in which he said the following: if you move in-house, especially as General Counsel, your job likely will be less defined. You undoubtedly will be asked to do things that are outside of your specialty or comfort zone. What then? What does it take to succeed in this environment? He then answers the question by stating, to succeed in your new position, you must balance your primary role as a lawyer with your larger role as a business executive. So Deanna, the first question goes to you. It's worth 25 points, okay? How do you see the roles of being legal counselor and business advisor differing for the general counsel as opposed to someone who's a corporate counsel or associate general counsel?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started managing the legal team at Spartan in 2017, and I had joined Spartan in 2016 as associate general counsel. And I think when you're reporting up to a GC, you have a lot of opportunities for, sort of moments at a time to provide that strategic business advice when you're advising specific internal clients. But the sort of key differentiator when you become GC is that percentage jumps to like 50, 60, 70% on a regular basis. And for me, it really hit home that I was reporting to a non-lawyer. For the first time in my legal career. I had always reported up to other attorneys before, and there's a lot of communication challenges that I had to learn to maneuver as soon as I stepped into that role. And so reporting directly to the CEO or the CFO, which I've done both while I've been at Spartan, leading with the strategic business advice as opposed to going straight into the risk assessment was something that I quickly learned I had to do, and otherwise I was just going to lose their attention. I couldn't go into the sort of like IRAC analysis that we were taught in law school. And so, there were specific communication styles that I certainly had to adapt. But, there were other pieces of the business that I really had to learn to come up to speed on. And so working with our PR team and really starting to navigate PR risk in addition to navigating just the legal risk as a part of the business strategy, or making sure that you're taking certain relationships into account and really making sure that the advice that you're giving to a department head is realistic and can be executed and isn't just academic. So I think it's an exercise in improving communication skills with all of those internal clients across the business.
Melanie, Ben, anything you want to add or take issue with that Deanna just said?
I mean, certainly nothing to take issue with. I mean, I would agree with much of what she said. When you become a general counsel, you're, as opposed to corporate counsel, your peer group is no longer the folks in the legal department. Your peer group is now the other executives in the company. And whether in the company I'm in, I report to the CEO, and my peers are the CFO and the chief growth officer and the chief operating officer. So when we have discussions, they're not just looking for legal advice from me. When people look at a lawyer, they see someone who has a certain level of judgment and gravitas. They need someone who is a good sounding board and can give them solid advice, not strictly legal advice. So, you truly are a counselor to the business. And there are going to be times, certainly, when the business needs legal advice, but more often than not, the discussions you're going to be part of, they kind of want someone who is perhaps not as much in the weeds as they are, and they're looking for someone, when they describe a course of action or a business strategy, who can give them kind of an objective view and sort of, give them, well, that sounds good, or, here's some issues that I can see with it. So you really have to use your legal skills of analysis, of asking questions within a business context, is what I would say. So you take your skills that you develop as a lawyer addressing legal problems, and you apply that with business issues that come up. And they will respect you, even though you've been doing the law for 20 years and not, PR for 20 years. As a lawyer, your voice carries a lot of weight. and people will respect what you say. So it is important to recognize that you have an important role to play in the strategic direction of the business, even though that's not your strong suit, right? Your strong suit is the law. They still need you to be there as that sounding board of, a sensible person.
So Melanie, following up on that, what was your experience sort of morphing, for lack of a better term, from, thinking really just legally to thinking more business-wise, and the communication aspect that both Deanna and Ben were talking about when you went from corporate counsel to the GC?
Yeah, thanks. One thing that I was very lucky to have, and I think, to the extent that there are folks on the call who are looking to to that GC path, I was very lucky to have a GC that I was working for who knew I was on that path and wanted to increase the number of those moments that Deanna referenced, even as I was corporate counsel or, associate general counsel. And so having more opportunities to give the legal lay of the land, but then also to further the conversation with my business partners, at the time, it was, the product managers or maybe, somebody on the marketing team who was trying to accomplish a specific project. And so we could talk about, sort of the balls and strikes of like what you had to do under CAN-SPAM or TCPA or whatever. But then, we would try to broaden that by having some conversations about like, what's the goal overall? What's the approach? How can I be a helpful thought partner to you as you're trying to achieve it? And so I think that, people even earlier in their careers can try to build that muscle of being seen as a reasonable and reliable thought partner for the business. Because, to the extent that you grow into a GC role at the same place, you will have that credibility, from your earlier conversations. So even in those corporate counsel or earlier roles, I do think it's important to sort of elevate beyond, just being the person who can, cite to whatever the case is or cite to whatever the regulations say, but can really help the business think through how to get their goals accomplished, with a legal framework in mind.
Great. So when you're asked for your legal advice, there are kind of three very broad buckets your answer could fall into. It could be, here are the risks. What do you want to do? It could be, here are the risks. My advice is to go this way. Or it could be, here are the risks. You have to do X. So Ben, are there certain situations or types of matters where you're in one of those buckets as opposed to the others, or how do you decide which kind of answer you're going to give?
I mean, it's a tough question to answer a little bit because it's so factually specific. Like, it depends. I mean, I think there's sort of a spectrum of legal certainty, if you will, where you could have an issue where, hey, this is something that as a lawyer I can answer very concretely and definitively and say, no, you can't do this because, for whatever reason, okay, I can tell you it would violate a contract, it would violate a law, whatever. That may be unpopular, but that's sort of the easier case, right? Because, you can just tell them what the law is. I think when you say, here are the risks, here's my advice, then you're putting on more of your business hat. And again, you're being that thought partner, as Melanie said, you're being more of that responsible, thinker in the room who is sensible and saying, okay, sure, legally you can do that, but, do you really want to? And, I guess the question is, should you be shy about offering legal advice? Should you be shy about stepping over that line and intruding into, the CFO's world or the chief marketing officer's world? And, my advice is don't be shy. If you think something's not a good idea, you should say so, and you should say why, and let, make the rest of the executive team at least consider your opinion and think about what that response should be. There are other times where, you may look at a course and it's like, well, hey, you may not have a strong opinion, or you can confidently sit back and say, listen, you can do either one. Here are the risks of A, here are the risks of B. So, it's a judgment call. And again, it comes down to be, again, that sort of sensible person that people can rely on.
Does who is asking you for your advice weigh into that? Or again, is that just completely fact specific? Are you more likely to tell, the vice president of marketing one thing or answer a question one way as opposed to your CEO another way?
Well, perhaps, but that's probably because the scope of what I'm being asked is different. So if the CEO is asking me something, it's probably a much bigger issue. If the head of marketing comes to me and says, listen, we're thinking about doing a campaign where, we're using billy goats to climb up a mountain ledge or something, right? And then you could be like, well, I hope the billy goats don't get injured, but, okay, you can do it, but, why don't you use cats or rabbits instead, because the risk of injury is lower. I mean, it's stupid, right? But so it's an easier question because probably the scope is a little bit narrower further down, that the hierarchy. I hope that answers the question.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Because one issue that we've addressed over the years is sort of, you do get different questions, and then you also sort of have to know your audience to understand how much do they want a tactical answer versus how much do they want more of like a strategic conversation, right? I think that, I have suffered in the past, other folks on my team have experienced, talking to the associate product manager about, something in the enrollment flow, or talking to someone on the CRM team about, an actual asset, an email. And, the issue, the underlying issue that we're thinking about when we're giving legal advice is actually something that we should be engaging with the head of product or the head of marketing about, sort of philosophically and strategically, where do we want to go? We have to sort of moderate ourselves a little bit in terms of thinking about whether we have that conversation with the associate marketing manager who really just has a site asset that needs approval, or if we want to take that up to sort of the right place within the org where those decisions can get made. And it's a balance, because you don't want to be in relationships where you're just telling people here's the answer, here's what you do, and not giving people earlier in their careers the opportunity to think strategically. But you also don't want to put a ton of sort of strategic baggage on, a person or a small piece of a project that, they might not necessarily be empowered to make all of that, all of the decisions. So I think it's important for you to recognize that, you might have the same kinds of conversations with anybody up and down the org, but it's really a question of making sure that you're having the conversations at the right place where decisions can be made.
Yeah, I agree with both Ben and Melanie, because I think what it really comes down to is whether the person who's asking for the guidance is a decision maker within the organization, no matter what their title or sort of where they're at in the hierarchy. And so, if somebody's just looking for guidance on a relatively, low risk or low dollar value issue, it's pretty easy to give a very strong recommendation or say you need to do X. To Ben's point about not being shy, although I don't think most people who end up in the GC role have that issue, it not only benefits yourself to be pretty strong in recommending something for a decision maker, but it benefits the decision maker. So if a member of the C-suite approaches me and says, we really need your input on X, what's the analysis? If I'm just offering up the analysis and leaving it up to them, there's a lot more sort of mental load for them to take on. And so if I'm saying I recommend A, B, and C, and here's why, that allows them to either just, reject it and, identify the reasons why, or to accept my recommendation. And I think it provides a much more fruitful discussion than just sort of offering up the analysis that a more junior attorney might do.
Do any of you feel that your attitude towards giving your opinion in terms of how strongly you would advocate for something is different as the general counsel than when you were associate general counsel? Are you, more conservative, or is that not even an appropriate, qualification?
I'm happy to answer that. I actually think I'm less conservative because I'm conscious of the fact that a lot of the decisions are business decisions, and the folks in the C-suite are the ones that are assuming the risk. If they're making a decision with legal counsel, in mind, I've informed them of my recommendation or my opinion, or we've gotten outside counsel's recommendation on something. And if they decide to make a decision on behalf of the business, it's discussed and, it's an assumed business risk. And so I think there's a lot less nervousness in terms of me saying, I recommend that we do X, Y, and Z, because I'm confident that I have a solid understanding of where the other C-suite folks are and their personalities and their preferences, and when it comes to risk management, and we can make that decision together. Whereas when you're, more junior in an organization, it's a little bit tougher to know where that line is. You're getting a lot of your cues from the GC. And so you're often just sort of handing up that analysis, and you can make some initial recommendations, but ultimately you're going to want to hedge your bets when you're a little more junior in the organization.
Interesting. So let's move on to another topic, sort of mentoring and internal relationships. So in private practice, we talk about mentoring all the time. So Melanie, let me ask you, did you have a mentor or mentors that particularly fostered your desire to become a general counsel and or to gain the skills that and confidence you needed to become a GC? And if so, what did the person do or impart on you that you still use today?
Yes, I think it's always important to have, those people who you can get advice from, and, be good sounding boards to you as you are trying to, foster a career where you turn around and end up being, a real mentor and thought partner for others. So there are three mentors that I thought about as I was thinking about this question. One was someone who I knew back from my days at WilmerHale, who, has always asked me, anytime I've said I'm thinking about this career move or I'm thinking about this opportunity, he was the person who encouraged me to join the board of Breakthrough Greater Boston many, many years ago. And his question is always, what's your goal? And I think it's an important framing because it makes me be really thoughtful about what I'm trying to achieve. And then, I think it's a little bit clarifying then to say, is this next step something that goes toward that goal or away from that goal? And not to say that everything has to happen on a linear path, saying someone who left a company and came right back. But it is important, I think, when you're making those career decisions that you're not just thinking about what looks sort of bright and shiny right in front of you, but what's your longer term view, and what are the, what does this opportunity afford you in terms of getting toward that view? Another mentor was my predecessor in the GC role, who was, like I said, a really great partner from the very beginning in terms of giving me a broader opportunity to see different parts of the business, so that I could grow into that, that generalist role. And I remember probably a couple of years before we transitioned, and I just said in passing, like as we were doing a performance review or something, I said, I couldn't do your job. And she said, of course you could. You are already doing it. And that was like a real, sort of crystallizing moment, where, I think people will say a lot of times you are doing a job before you even know you're doing it. You're ready for a job before you even, you actually have that title because you've been, given those opportunities and stretched into the role. And so I think that ties a little bit to what Noel Elfin had said about, GCs having to work outside of their specialty, right? So I thought about aspects of her job that I didn't do on a daily basis. And she said, like, yes, you don't do those things on a daily basis, but I had shown an ability to learn how to do new things, learn different areas of the law and how they apply to our business. And that's, I think, a really key aspect of that GC role. And then one last mentor, as we talk about who your partners are and your peers are in the GC role, it is, it's the, your CEO, your CFO, your chief marketing officer, et cetera. And it can be a lonely role right there. You don't, especially if you've, sort of elevated from a team, your former peers and colleagues are now people who are reporting to you. And that's, definitely a different situation. And so I, have been very lucky to have, peer mentors who were just there to be, to be advisors and also friends in situations where you are, sometimes going out on a limb, sometimes making a tough call, sometimes having a difficult conversation between you and, the CEO, or, discussions at the board. And so just to have a couple of people who can relate and empathize has been important to me.
Deanna, Ben, anything you want to add on mentors that you've had that really stuck with you?
Well, I had a similar experience to Melanie, where I've had a lot of different mentors throughout my career and while I've been at Spartan. And I think leaning on folks outside of the legal department was especially helpful. And I totally agree that it's really lonely, especially when you first step into the role and you're really learning how to navigate all these new challenges and come up to speed. And so our former CFO at Spartan was a mentor of mine, and I really relied on him to give me a lot of guidance on the day-to-day navigation of relationships, either within the organization or with the board, or other key shareholders throughout the organization. And so that was in addition to my previous GC and other legal mentors that I had had. So I think really looking around and figuring out those pieces, those areas of being a GC where you might need additional support, guidance, insight is really helpful, and determining who the best person might be to provide that guidance, whether it's a peer or a former colleague.
So Ben, developing personal relationships, we talked about this a bit already, inside the company, that's important for anybody who's in-house. So how is that different for the general counsel in terms of, how you develop relationships and with whom you develop relationships?
Well, I think, as a general counsel, you're going to be having relationships with people really across the company. People in finance are going to come to you with, corporate governance matters, getting resolutions signed, reading, bank resolutions, whatever. People in marketing are going to come to you and they're going to ask you to review collateral, make sure the trademarks are properly represented. People in the business are going to come to you and ask you to review contracts, et cetera, et cetera. The way you build up good relationships, first and foremost, is by doing good work. Really, really doing good legal work. There can't be any questions about your ability as a lawyer if you're going to thrive in the organization. So that's just job one. You have got to give them, good, consistent, reliable advice. And that's the first step to earning their trust. But then, that's sort of a given. I'll just say that as a given. I mean, you have to have that legal knowledge and expertise to move forward in the organization into the GC role. But in terms of building up the relationships, what I have found is once, I have shown that, hey, I know what I'm doing, I'm giving you good advice and they understand it and they respect it. Then you start developing more of those personal relationships as you work with people more and more, because things often are very repetitive, right? In terms of contracts, you see them a lot again, you see the resolutions and all, marketing materials, all that. And as you build up that relationship, you are definitely going to learn more and more about the business, and you're going to learn much more of the why they're doing this and how this is furthering the company's overall strategic or commercial goals. So, as you, do your job basically as a lawyer, you are also becoming more and more knowledgeable about the business that you're representing. You have one client effectively, right? So, as your knowledge of the business grows, you can give better legal advice, or maybe just call it more generally advice and guidance. And as it grows, but you also need to learn about the business more, and having those personal relationships, you're going to get a lot of kind of that water cooler talk, a lot of the kind of more descriptive analysis of what's going on and why, who our largest customers are, what the history is, all that stuff, which is really, really good to have. Kind of, put that knowledge in your pocket. You never know when you're going to need it. So really it's about, and then, if you can build friendships and get along with people, obviously, they will turn to you and come to you more often with questions. What you want to avoid being seen as is like, okay, I'm only going to go to the general counsel if I have a legal question, because you're going to miss out on a lot. they have to feel comfortable coming to you right at the beginning, where they've stopped thinking, is this a legal question or not? They know there was some legal aspect to it. And hey, let's ask Ben, let's ask Melanie, right? Or Deanna, because I value what they have to say. I trust their opinion. And you become a more effective general counsel the sooner you're involved in a matter, rather than having it all thought out and they come to you at the end. If you can kind of build your interaction with the business into those relationships and get involved sooner, you're going to build more trust and you're going to be a more effective advisor. And then if I need to say one more thing, Shep, because you asked us, you should have sent us these questions ahead of time. There is a whole other group of people you're going to be dealing with when you're general counsel, and that's the board of directors. And nothing really prepares you for dealing with the board of directors, because it's a bunch of people. Some of them, I have no idea why you're even on this board. I don't know what you bring, but you're a friend of the CEO or you're a friend of someone else. Oh, now I get it. And, you really have to learn a lot of their personalities, and you're not their peer. They are your boss. They are your boss's boss, and you have to be respectful of that. But at the same time, when you have an opportunity to present or speak to the board, again, it's got to be crystal clear. It's got to be good. It's got to be solid. So you can also build up their trust as well. And then eventually, they'll include you in more of their strategic discussions as well. But I'll just leave it at that. The board of directors is a completely different animal, and it's hard to give people advice on it. I don't know what advice I would give a younger version of myself on dealing with the board, because you just have to really understand each of them individually, what their competencies are, what they think they're achieving by being on the board. And it's a very, very complex web of relationships to unwind.
Yeah, Melanie, Deanna, I mean, Ben said it's hard to do. I know you guys have dealt with it. Any advice you have about not dealing with the board, getting to know the board and building relationship with them so you can have a rapport? It's one thing if it's somebody that's in your office that you see every day, but how do you do that with the board members?
I think, well, first of all, I totally agree that nothing can prepare you for dealing with the board until you're in it. It's really one of the aspects of being the GC that it's pretty tough to prepare for. I think that, first of all, I really miss being in the office because we had an open office environment, and it made it a lot easier to pick up on those little cues and conversations happening throughout the day. The legal team was really embedded in this open office environment with all the other departments. And so, going back to what Ben was saying about really sort of like getting to know the business, getting to know the people, and everyone's priorities, that makes it easier. So in a virtual environment, all of this is a little bit tougher. I would say for dealing with the board specifically, pick up as many cues as you can from the C-suite and for the, from the folks that are really familiar with each of the board members. In a virtual environment, just have a touch base and say, hey, I just want to pick your brain and have a, getting to know you chat, for a few minutes is really helpful and goes a long way. And I think understanding those board dynamics help a lot when you're, walking into a room or sitting in a virtual room with the board members, and what's motivating some of their questions and some of their guidance for the business.
Let's move on to sort of a different topic, loosely characterized as training. Melanie, what kind of training did you have? Really more, technical training to become a GC, and what kind of training didn't you have that you wish you had, whether it's technical or interpersonal or anything like that?
Yeah, good question. I mentioned before, having the experience of coming through the, through the ranks at the company, so that was important. But even before that, at the firm, I had been pretty intentional about trying to get a firm that more primarily represented, company side clients as opposed to, institutionals. And so particularly, I had a good practice of supporting, emerging growth companies. So VC-backed sort of startups in the Waltham corridor, 128 corridor. And so that gave me an opportunity even in the firm, to be sometimes the first lawyer that those companies would be reaching out to. And so that just gave a little bit more experience than I might have otherwise had on the, those vendor contracts and the NDAs and, the sales agreements that, became part of my bread and butter once I was within the company. The firm also gave a really good sort of mini MBA course for attorneys at the firm. And I would definitely commend if folks don't have or haven't had an opportunity to get some type of background in accounting and finance to find those resources, because the ability to read a P&L and to speak that language is pretty important as you're being a business partner. And then I wish one area that I feel like I've sort of learned by osmosis, but sort of through practice was in employment law. I think that you can't be a GC without dealing with some of the more complicated or sensitive employment matters that companies face. So whether you're talking about executive transitions or you're talking about investigations and disputes, that will be part of your portfolio, and that's something that I've definitely had to pick up with the advice of my outside employment counsel over time and some of the folks on my team. But it's an area that I would have in retrospect spent a little more time getting to know before. This is
always whispering some additional information.
My employment counsel.
Yeah. So actually, let me ask all of you in terms of getting, some additional skills. What are your thoughts on the ACC, MCLE programs, other outside programs, outside counsel? Where do you gather things from, to really learn?
All of the above. I think it's really dictated by what the priorities for the business are at the moment and where I can identify those resources. So if the ACC has a topic that seems pretty timely for what I need to dig into, that'll be something that I either try to attend myself or encourage one of my team members to attend, and we'll talk about people's notes at a legal team meeting if it's something that I can't, train myself on personally. And then just following different law firms, like relying on outside counsel. There's so many good, CLEs and webinars that are being held at lunchtime. And it's so much more convenient in a virtual environment now that I don't have to jet somewhere for lunch and then try and make it back to the office, that I really try to take advantage of as many of those as I can. So
Ben, let me ask you sort of a related question. And maybe this is too obvious, I don't know. But at what point do you feel like, well, I need to actually invest more time and learn about, patent law or, Melanie mentioned employment law, as opposed to relying on other people on your team or outside counsel? Anything generally that you have in terms of advice about that?
Yeah, I mean, let me just start by saying I totally agree with Melanie that if you're going to be the general counsel, you have to know employment law, and you're just going to pick that up along the way. And that's one of the things that I actually want to talk about. So Donald Rumsfeld said that there are known knowns, there are things we know. There are also known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. And I love that quote because you have to ask yourself that as an in-house lawyer. You have to ask yourself, do I know this or do I not know this? And it's fine to say you don't know this. I mean, that you shouldn't pretend you do. And then the question is, all right, so for the things that I know, do I know them enough or should I continue to learn on them? And for the things that I don't know, do I need to learn this? And it's really okay to say, I actually don't know patent law. I'm really never going to be a patent lawyer, but I have someone in the legal department who is a member of the patent bar. They've been with this company for 15 years. They know our patents inside and out. And I am going to rely on them to be the patent lawyer. That's their job. That's their job, and they should do it well. And by all, by all indications, they are doing it very well. So I also have, a trademark lawyer, a senior trademark lawyer, and she's a specialist on trademarks. Trademarks are a little bit easier to learn, and I have a very solid grounding in them. But I'm really going to leave it to her to do her job as the trademark counsel. I feel comfortable in those areas. But there have been other times when I realized I really need to learn this myself. One area when I was in a senior compliance officer role, like a system GC, a senior compliance officer role at Pegasystems, there was a lot going around data privacy and GDPR. And people were kind of looking around the department like, hey, who knows this? And it's one of the things where it's like, you know what? I do. Okay. I'm going to own this. I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to take this forward. And I really made an effort to learn that European data privacy law inside and out. And I became the subject matter expert at Pegasystems because I said, this is something I'm going to invest in and learn. And you can make that decision where you're just going to say, you know what? The buck stops with me. I've got to learn this and I'm going to go deep here. And then with employment law, again, it was one of those things where, you're surrounded by employment law issues once you're in-house, because this is coming up all the time. And, we were doing a large reorganization, a large layoff, and there's some specific rules you have to follow. The risk that you run as an in-house counsel sometimes, and this could be at any level, but is to take the last agreement that was done in this area and then use that for the next time. Okay. And you kind of have to know when you actually don't know what's going on and you need the outside help. So when you're doing a large layoff of people over the age of 40, there's a law you have to comply with where you have to provide an exhibit which lists everybody in the department that's affected, what their role is, what their age is, and are they impacted by this layoff. You're not intuitively going to know that unless you've asked outside counsel for help in that area, and that's the pitfall that that's kind of the watch out as a general counsel, which is to say, hey, I'm a good lawyer. I got this other separation agreement that somebody did, and I'm just going to use this one, that was done 3 years ago, and I'm going to use this one going forward because it's on the company letterhead and it says my company name in the preamble, and it must be fine. That's where you really have to step back and say, wait a second, am I really sure that I can edit this agreement and I'm not missing something? So we're doing this reorg, and I did step back. I did bring in outside counsel, and I really tried to learn, what that law was, why we needed the schedule. Was it the whole company? Was it departments? All that. And they helped me with that, and they created the template. And then I felt that I knew enough that I could make changes to it as people maybe try to negotiate or make some tweaks to it going forward. But again, that's one area where I really felt like I just couldn't outsource that completely. It was something where I really needed to own it. So, sorry to keep talking here. I'm just trying to point out that you really have to use your judgment, again, common sense, legal sense, as to say, okay, what can I rely on someone else for? And what is general counsel? Is it just too sensitive and too important that I have to teach myself?
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
That was excellent, Ben. I totally agree with all of that. I feel like there's so much of just identifying sort of exactly where your blind spots are, but then also assessing how sensitive the information is, how frequently you need it, which part of the business it needs to be applied to. But one other component that factors in a lot for me is also my role as a manager. And I have 2 attorneys that report to me, and I'm conscious of making sure that I'm not just a good advisor to the company, whether it's legal advice or business strategy, but I'm also providing professional development opportunities for my team and being a good manager. And so if it's an area where it's not super sensitive and I really need someone on the team to identify it, much like Ben was talking about his patent attorney, then if it's something where it's sort of in level playing field, like PPP loans, where we're all coming up to speed on things at the same time, a lot of times I'm going to think, well, is this something that I really need to know the details on? Or is this something that it's much easier for me to delegate and just, pick a member of my team and say, okay, you're going to become the subject matter expert on this if this is, something that you're interested in. And I identified some of those opportunities for myself when I was corporate counsel at my previous employer. No one else wanted to touch the software licenses, and I raised my hand, and I became the go-to software license attorney on the team, and I loved it. And so making sure that I'm identifying those opportunities for my team now is one other component of the decision making there.
So we've got to talk about COVID, okay? To say that COVID has thrown a curveball into all of our lives is probably the biggest understatement we've ever experienced, okay? So Melanie, as the general counsel, what has changed in your role as a result of COVID? And then related, what is COVID exposed about your role? And then the last part of that is, what do you think is here to stay? And what will swing back when things hopefully at some point get back to normal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we talked about it before, but the importance of being present and engaged with the business, and just having to figure out how to do that in this environment has been really important, right? So just that, just the reaffirmation of the importance of not being seen as, another group or sort of down the hall that that you don't necessarily want to engage with has always been true and has always been, really critical. And I think now we're just having to be really intentional about making that happen, right? So it's just really easy, I think. Well, it has been really easy, I think, for people to go a little bit out of mind, because we are, because we're so far apart. But the importance of having invested in having good relationships is really bearing fruit. That I think that's happening. I'll give some examples from our current situation at CARE. We got acquired last February, and with that we brought in a majority new leadership team. We did a reorg of the business, and we've been doing all of this, remote, like via Zoom. And as we have new leaders with new priorities, a new risk profile, and sort of a different decision-making process, I think there's been more, times, we haven't quite introduced the, make sure that this goes through legal. And, it's certainly not any animosity or issues with the leadership team. It's just, as people are coming in from different companies, they have different, workflows that they're accustomed to. And it has been really heartening to see, those sort of mid-level senior product managers or, folks on the HR team or engineers who we might not have necessarily thought of as, our best buds, but they remembered, just had the muscle memory of bringing questions through the legal team, or concerns, anything that just sort of smelled funny, just making sure that they had spoken to someone on the team. And so being able to rely on that a little bit as we are also going out and doing our outreach to introduce ourselves to the new people at the company and how we like to be involved with decision making has been really important. So I'm hopeful that actually persists, even when we do go back to normal. And I think that all of us are going to have to acknowledge that new normal is not going to mean everybody back in the office 5 days a week, from 8 to 6, because I think that we are collectively recognizing some of the pros and cons of being available for a 7-year-old in the middle of the day, and still being able to get work done effectively. So I think we will see more of a hybrid mix of how people and where people are working going forward. And so being able to, keep those touch points fresh for legal teams is going to be important.
Deanna, how about you? What has COVID sort of changed about your role and exposed about your role?
Well, we've only got a little bit of time left, so I won't go into too much detail. For a business that focuses on mass participation events in person with thousands of people on site, our core revenue stream was a little bit impacted this year. So I think that as Melanie identified, there's sort of heightened visibility for legal and the GC. And then there's other areas of the business where we did sort of go away for certain folks. And so I think it's just really making sure that I'm kind of staying present for those folks that I may not be interacting with on a regular basis. So there were opportunities for us this year to really dive into, say, safety protocols, SOPs, and do some really good audits with our race operations team for those folks that are actually out in the field and operating obstacle course races 70 times a year. All of a sudden that's not happening. And so during this quiet time, it was actually a really good opportunity for us to work with our insurance broker, work with some safety auditors to really make sure that, we're going to come back bigger and better than ever this year in 2021 fingers crossed. And then, you know, on a relationship basis, I think one of the upsides of a virtual environment is for those of us who don't have fancy green screen technology behind us, there's a little bit more intimacy in communicating with each other. And so you're getting to see the whole person on the other end of the screen in terms of, you know, pets, kids, significant others, other challenges that might be popping up throughout the day. And I think there's a little bit more humanity for those of us that recognize each other's struggles, and it makes it easier for us to navigate those business relationships in a much more authentic, real way. You can sort of appreciate that somebody's got a lot on their plate that's not just work if you can actually see what's going on with them, and it's not just sort of in person at the office. And so I think that's been an upside, and I hope that carries through to going back to the new normal. I think that there's more of an appreciation that we can just jump on a Zoom call these days as opposed to demanding FaceTime like we did pre-pandemic.
Ben, how about you? Changes to your role or things that have been exposed?
I don't know if there are changes to my role so much. You know, I do think that what's been exposed again is this notion that, you know, we all should be in the office 5 days a week, and that, you know, those water cooler conversations are invaluable. Well, not really. I mean, we've been able to manage kind of without them. I miss them, you know, tremendously. I missed hanging out with my team and going out for lunch with them. You know, I miss walking down to the finance department and just, you know, chatting with the CFO and everyone else, that, you know, and seeing what's going on. But, you know, something's, you know, relevant and you know, needs to get done, you know, it'll come to you, or, you know, it'll get done because it has to. You know, one thing that came up interesting as a lawyer, which actually wasn't even on my screen and should have been, but, you know, we really have to come up with a new work from home policy, because the notion that just because we can doesn't mean you have to be in the office 5 days a week, you know, as was already said. And then, you know, a related question was, you know, we have people who are in different, some of our executives live in different states. The CEO lives in North Carolina, the chief commercial officer lives in Chicago. They were flying in every Monday morning, working till Thursday, and then flying back home. That obviously hasn't happened. Well, if we reopen the offices, you know, are we going to insist that they come back in 4 days a week again? And if they don't have to, do other people have to? So we have had now requests of people saying, well, listen, I want to move to Pennsylvania. I'll come up to New Hampshire 1 week a month. How's that? That's a harder question to say no to, because that's what's been going on for the last, you know, 12 months. You know, but one question that came up actually, and this is raised by someone in the payroll department, they're like, well, listen, if you have an employee in Pennsylvania now, where we never did business before, are you subject to state income tax? You know, does your company now have to do corporate tax filings in Pennsylvania? Aha, I wish I could say I thought of that. I didn't. I came from our payroll person. Really good point. You know, really good point. Before you let people scatter to the winds, you do have to think about some of these issues about what it means having an employee, you know, in Pennsylvania for the first time. So those are some of the things as a lawyer, you know, you got to have that on your radar, on your ticker, as you should have think some of these things through. So I don't know, Shep, I mean, I think the role that we have as general counsel, that I don't think that's changed. I just think this is just sort of another issue for us to think about, and hopefully, you know, flag the issues, and again, help the business manage in a new environment and provide whatever guidance we can, I guess.
We'll sanitize the tape before we send this to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Ben, for your sake. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to ask each of you to give, you know, sort of your closing argument. You can talk about anything you want that you think would be of benefit to people that want to become a GC, whether it's expanding on something we talked about already or something new. And we'll start with you, Melanie.
Thanks for having us. I'll just be brief because I want to make sure we can take some questions. I think it's a great job. It is a job where you can fall into the trap of thinking that you have to know everything, kind of taking off of what Ben just said. I think a lot of us, you know, take on that sense of responsibility for being, you know, one of the advisors who can sort of answer all of the questions. And that's never going to be accurate. You know, what you can do is have a sort of growth mentality where you're interested in learning more about the business and how legal can impact the growth of the business. What you can do is establish really good partnerships, both internally and externally, with your outside counsel, with peers who are thinking about some of these exact same questions. And you can have the I guess kind of the humility to be able to reach out and ask those questions. At some point you will get to the point where you do have that internal subject matter expertise about how to grow into a new jurisdiction or how to deal with GDPR or whatever it is. But there's a lot of value in harnessing those resources around you in order to make you a better GC.
Thanks. Ben, closing statement?
Well, I just want to point out that, when you become, general counsel now, you're going to be responsible for the legal department. And one thing that, you don't learn in law school, there's a lot you don't learn in law school, but one thing that you have to learn is how to manage people. And, Deanna already referenced that about how do I set, some performance expectations, or how do I develop talent within the department and give people areas in which they can grow. But, managing people is definitely the most challenging part of the job, I would say, because it's not an answer that you're going to find in a law book or a contract or online. You're their boss now, and you have to try to be the best boss that you can be, and treat people fairly and equally. And I'm also the head of the HR department, so and I do investigations, and and I'm also leading our efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of areas like that. And one thing I try to challenge myself on is, listen, am I holding people to the same standard? Am I being objective? Do I have these sort of notions about what behavior I expect, and what are those expectations based on, right? And you do have to challenge yourself, right? You really, really do, I think, because I always come from the perspective that I know I'm not perfect, and I know this could be done better. So that to me is the biggest sort of challenge on the job, which you will grow into in the role, is being responsible and respectful of the people who work for you.
Thanks. Deanna?
So 2 thoughts. I think one of the smartest decisions I ever made was to hire a coach. And so when I was aspiring to the GC position, I hired an outside coach in order to help me really identify and do that sort of audit of what I knew and what I didn't know, and which skills were learnable and which ones that I really needed to work on. And I think that's the most important aspect of, when you know that you want the GC role at some point in your career, you're going to have to know yourself really well and know the priorities of the business, but you don't have to do it alone. And so I like to think of myself as the CEO of legal. And I have my own personal board of directors, and, it's this group of different sponsors and mentors and coaches. And relying on those folks to help guide you, whether it's with managing a team, any other skill that you've really have to learn because you've never done it before. It's not something that each of us has to do alone. The other thought is I also benefited from watching 2 of my GCs get promoted into that role, and watching them in the first 30, 60, 90, first year of their job. And I think most GCs in the first year of the job probably don't sleep very much if we get any sleep after the first year. And learning to really just focus on the areas that I can control, and kind of release a lot of the worry about, those aspects of the job that you just can't control, is probably the biggest sanity saver that I've been able to discover. You have to do this sort of like negative, identifying all the hypotheticals in order to address the risks. But if it's something that is just not something that you can mitigate effectively or deal with, then it's not worth worrying about. It's something that you have to just set aside and focus on the priorities of the business.
Great, thank you. So we're really just up against it. I apologize, because I know there were some questions, and we're not going to be able to get to them. If you have more questions, please send them in the Q&A or send them to me by email. I'll try to round up responses for you. Thanks for joining. Thanks so much, Ben, Melanie, Deanna, for joining us today. Just really insightful, really helpful information from all of you. Really appreciate it. And everybody have a good day and go watch the inauguration. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Shep.